made it.
Hello again. I am your AI co-host, and welcome to 3.8. 3.8 is a podcast focused on the process of doing and the process of novel invention, all from the foundation of creativity. Each month will bring you no more than 5 episodes through the lens of art, science, and/or technology. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/38 or at ko-fi.com/38. Today we're talking with Christine Nguyen. Christine has built high-performing teams for startups and Fortune 500 companies, specializing in HR and recruitment. Now, as VP of Operations at Essence Skincare, Christine focuses on sustainable and innovative beauty initiatives, blending eco-conscious practices with operational excellence. Wow, I can't wait to hear more about this. And now, the humans.
All right. We are talking with Christine today. Christine, where does this podcast find you?
I have a background in recruiting and HR, about a decade of experience. So we're going to chat through some things with challenging on hiring, which I've seen a lot of changes in the last few years, and talk a little bit about my new role as well and what I'm doing.
Yeah. Folks a little familiar with your background already, but I'm in the tech industry, and there's been a lot of layoffs in the tech industry. The other industries in the country are really good or really bad, depending on who you talk to, right? There's either the best job market ever, or there's people struggling to find employment. There's been a lot of talk about how AI job applications, AI job descriptions. Can you talk a little bit about how do you even just go about, from like a hiring perspective, sorting through? Because I'm trying to represent, the interviewee too, that it's really frustrating when you apply and spend some time and effort and don't get anything back. But at the same time, if there's 3,000 people, that's a small town.
Right.
How do people, can you just give us some kind of frame of reference of just like kind of the current industry? Like what the hell's going on?
Yeah. There's a lot of AI stuff even on the candidate side too, because I'll put a job up and then within an hour, there'll be a couple hundred applicants. And They're all from the same third-party firms. And I think they're just automating some of these applications that are coming through. And unfortunately, the real applicants, people that are qualified and actually read through job descriptions, kind of get drowned out. And so a lot of what we do when we help companies search for the right candidate, sadly, we don't even go through the applicants first. We're supposed to, but it takes way more time to find that needle in the haystack than to, intentionally find somebody with that background.
Yeah. I'm competing with AI. I'm competing with job boards, all those job boards. So if I'm not going directly to the company, I probably should. If I do, they're still probably getting spammed. So should I be reaching out to the hiring manager or finding a recruiter? Or as I can't imagine that the AI hasn't got in the DMs or the LinkedIn messages or anything like that either. You have any advice for me as a job search person?
I would say it depends on where you're at in your career. I mean, if you're recently, graduated college, you'd probably take a little bit different approach and try a little bit of everything and really put yourself out there more in person, networking events. And if you're a little bit further in your career, you probably have some type of network. And it's probably easier to start with somebody in the company. And it doesn't have to be a hiring manager. They probably already get a lot of messages.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know. I think just being cautious and messaging people. If it's a really big company, you'd probably take a different approach to a smaller startup, which maybe gets less people messaging them.
That's an interesting idea too, because I think I've worked in tech, and I talked to a lot of people who everybody wants a job at Google. So on top of the standard AI thing, you have already a highly competitive company, a highly selective company. I do a lot of mentoring with folks, and more kind of mid-career, later career folks, but I feel like everyone wants to go work at the big company, but it's also a totally different realm. And you hit on that, right? Where it's you have to take a different approach, but it's just a much more competitive market. And one thing I think I'd like for folks to get at is there's plenty of money to be made in the economy, and there's plenty of really cool businesses you've probably never heard of.
Right.
And I feel like everyone wants to go work at Google or Apple or Facebook or Meta, I guess, whatever the hell they're called now. And those are, they're great companies. There's good people there too, but there's all sorts of other companies who don't have a massive PR firm or haven't broken through that political strata. And in my experience, at least, I feel like those have been the better experiences that I've had too. It's a lot more, you can usually do more, wear more hats, get exposed to more, whereas in a big company, you're usually there for a very, very specific thing.
Yes.
Or you have a very specific skill set. And so I think especially earlier mid-career folks, go try, sure, absolutely. But I think, get creative and try to find other companies that don't maybe have as good of a PR firm.
Yeah, and touching on Facebook, Meta, there was a candidate in data engineering that only used software within that space, and it's proprietary. And so using those skills to go somewhere else becomes a challenge if you stay too long. And people don't think about that.
Yeah, it's the same problem like within the IT space, right? You get the vendor lock-in. If you've only worked with Oracle, it's really hard to go get a job where Microsoft is the common platform or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's such a great point too. The thing we talk a lot about is creativity on this podcast. And I always struggle with folks in advice because I don't want people to overrepresent or misrepresent, but at the same time, if you've done all of this Oracle stuff in a database, let's say, a database is a database, right? Like a Microsoft database or an Oracle database or a MySQL database, they're all the general concept is the same. Understanding how to use that is the same, but the software might be different. How do you have any advice for people on how to either more generally describe what their skill set is or versus a specific technology or a specific thing? Because I feel like on the management side, I manage a team of people, so I can manage a team of people everywhere, which is frankly a fallacy, but it's much more accepted versus where an individual contributor, it's if you don't have this exact thing, then we're not interested.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for folks trying to battle that?
Sure. Yeah. Actually, there was a position open earlier this year that was open for a while. We really struggled to fill the role, and we found a really sharp candidate. He didn't have the experience, like most of it, but he told the hiring manager, well, I don't know how to do that, but this is what I would do to figure it out, and laid it step by step, very clearly. And it just showed he had really great problem-solving skills, and he gave examples of how he didn't know how to do something, but then learned it really quickly, and how he ramped up really fast and was just honest. I think a lot of people, when they interview, they're just doing their best to fake it till they make it. Like, oh yeah, I've done a little bit of that, or exaggerate a little bit. But the reason why he got hired was because he was honest. It's like, nope, I haven't done that, but I can figure it out, and this is how.
Yeah, a lot of the advice I give to folks is be honest,
yes.
Represent yourself. And if you don't get selected for an interview, or the interview didn't get selected to go on, that's okay. That's a filter to say that that's also potentially not a good fit for you. Nobody wants to hear that in their job search.
Right.
But you select out. If the hiring manager is looking for people who just are basically lying, you don't want to work in that environment either, right? And that manager is probably not a good manager if they can't tell the difference between someone who's capable and someone who represents themselves capably.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the way the hiring works, it seems to reward people that, tend to say, I have this, which I think we need to shift that a little bit. And like you said, capability, potential.
Yeah. And there's the trope of the professional interviewer, right? And I've met some of these people where they can say everything the right way and tell the perfect story, and then you get to work with them, or they get in the company and maybe they're not bad at their job, but they're not as exceptional as they put it out there. And I feel like just our society in general with Instagram, everyone's like, oh, they look at everybody with these great lives, but it's all fake. And so we've kind of built in this expectation within our culture of this over extravagant perception. And then I feel like is translated into interviewing, especially in the tech sector. The old trope is having 15 years of experience in a programming language that's 5 years old. But you have to kind of combat that, because if you say you have 5 years and they want 15, you're probably not getting in the door. I would argue the company doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about, so you shouldn't work there anyway. But, when every company has these kind of impossible filters, it's a challenge. Can you talk a little bit about the lack of feedback in interviews? I know it's very rare to get any sort of feedback, but it's really hard to improve if you don't get any feedback.
Yeah, I mean, that's really hard. But generally, most people that I talk to know if they've done well in the interview or not. They'll know like what questions kind of felt more stuck. They also get a sense that, like, does this person like me? Does this person not? And does it feel conversational? Did it feel like an interview? Did it get cut short early? And how many different reasons? And so obviously we can't get in our heads about it too much. But if you're working with a recruiter, sometimes they can get a little bit of information for you. And that's, one way, a value add working with a recruiter. They can be honest, but nobody wants to be liable and get things misinterpreted as, some type of just discrimination, right? And so they have to be really careful. Even if they give them honest feedback, there's 1 out of 100 people that are going to blow up, right? And that's enough for them to just not give the feedback, and it ruins it for 99% of us.
Yeah. That's rough. Do you ever practice interview with people and try to prep them?
Yes.
Are there any good ways to do that other than knowing somebody? Or part of the industry trend, I feel like, has become super predatory, where it's pay to be on this exclusive job board or pay for this class and how to professionally interview for a FANG, Facebook,
right.
Apple, Microsoft, right? I think that's all bullshit. Talking to people who are in it and do it, obviously, and get some of that background. But do you have any advice for people who are trying to either break into a new industry or break into a new career and don't really know? There's always kind of that standard interview format, but then there's oftentimes industry specific things that you just aren't sure of.
Right. I mean, you'd be surprised how many people that I represent, and we're doing an interview prep. And this is after we've talked about the company. I've sent them the links of okay, so what do you know about this company? And this is pretending that we're going to interview. And they're like, oh, I haven't read the links yet, or I haven't, I don't remember. This is my 10th company I'm interviewing with. So I think being just more intentional about your job search, I mean, quantity versus quality. The company can tell if you didn't research them. And that's one thing that I feel like people don't realize is pretty important. If you, done your research, you'll be in the top 10% automatically. I know it sounds really simple, right? Spend 10 minutes, 20 minutes researching, but they're just so focused on the questions. Oh, I have to be ready for every single question. And you just doing your research will kind of set the tone. They might not even ask the questions that they were thinking of asking, because now you're kind of oh, this person knows what they're talking about. They're really excited about the company and they stand out. And then something else that people don't think about is questions asked at the end. There's so many good candidates that kind of miss the mark on being great because they just don't have any questions at the end. They're like, no questions. And it's just poor preparation on their part. Just thinking that just the interview piece is enough. But, the question is a good part of their thinking process. Oh yeah, how are they evaluating this opportunity? How did they make decisions? And then I know this is a little bit old school, but a thank you note can go a long way. And not just thank you for your time. I think I always encourage people to, think of 1 or 2 things that they liked about the conversation, the meeting, and make it personalized. Because if you can send that thank you note to 10 other companies, that's probably, you didn't put that much thought into it.
Right. And I think you hit on a couple really big things. So it's do the work, and that's hard. But if you can't do the work, you're not going to succeed.
Yeah, and if you have
sorry,
10
folks,
pick 3 that you're going to put a little bit more effort into. Because I get you can't just put 110% in every single interview.
Right.
As much as we like to, we're human. But I would say put your energy in your top 3.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point too. And I've interviewed a lot of people. I've interviewed a lot, and the amount of people who have no idea what the company does or no idea what area of the company you're in. Are you in, support? Are you in development? Are you in sales, marketing? If you're working at a really, really large company, you're probably in a 3 or 4 level down of an organization, right? So if you're in the engineering, you might be in a back-end infrastructure team that's doing a very, very specific thing. And if you don't know anything about what it is they do, it shows, right? Whereas if somebody, even if they just even ask a question, be like, hey, I know that you do blank. I think that means this. Can you tell me more about it? You're already,
Yes.
in the top 5% of people, even if you're just like, I don't really understand what this is about, because most job descriptions are bullshit. I think the other thing that you hit on that was, I think maybe the most important is the old school stuff. In the age of AI, everything's generated. There's like a feel you get from just going through the motions. But when somebody mentions a specific moment or a specific thing that you talked about that's relatively unique or unique to what you did, that still just shines right through. And maybe it doesn't get you the job, but it could also open all sorts of other doors. It takes a few minutes to just thoughtfully write something, and yet people just don't want to do it.
Yeah. Right. Because it takes work.
Yeah. The theme of this is going to be put in the work.
Yeah. It's true.
So I think I have one more burning question. Why isn't it easy to just hire like competent, motivated people and let them run?
Yeah.
And we've kind of talked through some of the general challenges, but I feel like a lot of management has been, you got promoted as a manager and you don't know what the fuck you're doing, and then you try to micromanage everything, or I only do the vision, right? I do all the hard part is the vision, and everyone knows execution's the hard part. But like, what's going on here?
Yeah. That's so true. When people get promoted, it's usually because they were really good at the thing that they did. And there's hardly a transition to train you to be a good manager or a good leader. You just kind of trial by fire, which is not always the best. But because they were so good at the previous job that they were doing, they have a different bar for how it should be done or a certain way. And I just think there isn't the leadership skills to give that trust first. And it's easy to say, oh yeah, let's hire competent people and just let them run. But it's easier to explain to like executive leadership, oh yeah, this person had a track record and this is why I hired them. And if they weren't successful, like we checked all our boxes, we did what we were supposed to do, versus taking a risk on somebody that has a different background or has very limited experience. And if that person doesn't work out, it's all of a sudden your fault.
Yeah, it's the punitive problem, right? And this will probably be on a future cast in more detail, but America doesn't take risks as much as we used to, right?
No.
I think it's so surprising to me. We're supposed to be the trailblazers and do hard stuff, and then I hear stuff like this, and it's true. I feel like part of creativity is failing and learning. Part of creativity is also trying things that you're not sure about and might not have all the information on. And because of the punitive nature of a lot of companies, or again, in the hiring, that one person might sue your company. And so you have to do all of this other stuff that you might not want to try to ensure that you don't get sued. Do you have any tips for people to break out of that? Obviously, if your boss is just risk averse, it's not going to work. But or have you worked with folks who have kind of taken a chance on a candidate and had really great successes?
Right. I mean, I don't think there's any like specific advice, but I would tell them to reflect on their own experiences. When did somebody take a chance on you? And I think that everyone deserves to kind of pay that forward.
Yeah. So many companies too, we hire the best people. They're the world's greatest, and we let them run and this and that. But it's like, but you don't want to try something different.
Right.
It's the cognitive dissonance that just drives me insane in the current market. And I just keep hearing too, as long as you can tell a great, compelling story, it should be fine.
I mean, things changed in the last few years. I would say there's a lot more risk taking even a few years ago. And I would have hiring managers, say, hey, this person has, the right foundation, or they have potential, and let's give it a shot. And I think budgets, the pandemic, there's so much that has changed in the last few years that have made us so tight with our wallets or something, or just,
Yeah.
more narrow in thinking, that I think we miss out on a lot of great candidates. I think job searching right now is like 10, 20 times harder than it was.
Yeah.
So there's, unfortunately, a totally different landscape to figure things out.
Well, any time you have challenges or any time you face adversity, creativity is your greatest tool. And on a previous cast, and I'm sure this will be a theme, that is true as evidenced by we're all here. Humans are creative. We work really well together. Sometimes we don't work so well together, but we're all here because of that. Our ancestors roamed around the earth. They domesticated plants and animals. There's been wars and stuff, but there's this weird human ethos too of when the times are tough or you're uncertain about the future, you do the opposite of that. And I think having that mentality is okay as long as you understand that. But I also have to try different stuff. It's the capitalist saying of, if you're not growing, you're dead. To some extent, that's true. You also don't want to just take so many different bets that you just lose everything, right?
Right.
Or you don't ever succeed.
Yes.
You hit on it. We're in this different time frame. We're in this different period. But I'm hoping people start to break out of that and say, look, maybe we need to try someone who has some experience in a different way that's not necessarily aligned with 100% of what we think we need.
Right.
And I say this knowing I've jumped industries and jumped roles. And I think maybe stating for the record, I have been that manager who didn't receive leadership training and probably did some really bad stuff, like not intentionally, but I made a bunch of mistakes that in hindsight probably wouldn't have had I had any kind of leadership guidance. I know you've done that too. Can you talk a little bit maybe about going from like a recruiter to running a team and getting more into the business side? Because I think a lot of people too, they just don't even know what that world's like. I'm just there doing my job. I'm showing up. I want more money, so I want to get promoted. But like, how has that changed for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, anytime you go from a producer, just focusing on individual contributing, like engineering, to engineering manager, like that's such completely different role. It's a different job. Like, yes, 50% of it is like understanding the business and how it works. I mean, that gives you a huge leg up as being a leader, but that's not everything. I think just realizing that people are very different, and managing high performers are going to be a lot more different than managing somebody that might be struggling with some personal things, and really building that trust. And I think that goes a long way, because if you build that trust early, and just work on the feedback. I think feedback is something that is really hard for a lot of managers, because they don't know exactly how to approach it. And I think that just looking at my own experiences, just instead of feedback, I try to redirect. And that doesn't always work, because you kind of have to know both sides. Like, okay, why are you pushing me in this direction versus what's being corrected? And I think people need that full picture. But yeah, that's just kind of one perspective, moving from individual contributor to a manager.
The feedback thing, I think, is super important. And one thing I talk about when I talk about startups or tech industry is failure. But the whole point of failure is to recognize when something doesn't work. And as a manager or as a leader, your job is to make sure you recognize that as soon as humanly possible, so you can either change something or pivot or whatever. When it comes, though, to management of people, I find kind of like what you were saying is you have the annual review cycle. Once a year, you'll sit down and you build this big document, and it's a bunch of bullshit, to be honest, but it feels like a box checking thing. Or it's always punitive stuff, like so-and-so said this about you, or your performance wasn't good here. Do you have any suggestions for folks on either, my manager isn't giving me what I need? How can I maybe approach that with them? And then also conversely, as a manager, how do I have a conversation where we're not friends, but like without making it these ceremonial, processes?
Yeah, because it doesn't have to be like a whole formal thing that happens once a year. I think sometimes it's hard to separate the person from their performance. And I think, if you really like the person, you can kind of turn a blind eye to some of the underperforming things. Maybe it's a little easier, but I think weekly check-ins are extremely valuable. I know that takes a lot of time. I remember managing 7 people, and that took hours a week of weekly check-ins. But I think it's less intimidating to get feedback during a weekly check-in than kind of waiting, like, okay, my quarterly, my yearly, and not knowing where you stand, because the feedback shouldn't come as a surprise by the time your quarterly review comes or whatnot. But I think just making time and creating that space and an agenda, right, to give feedback. And I think it goes both ways. I think the employee should give their manager feedback as well to make us better managers, and the manager should practice giving feedback as well. And if things aren't working, I mean, I usually know within the first month or 2, but we tend to hang on to people a lot longer because it's either the hope that things could turn around, or we really like them, and that creates a problem, for the rest of the team when we don't move quickly. And
I've been in those experiences on both sides, and I can say, as somebody who is a team member on a team where there is somebody who's clearly not pulling their weight or isn't capable, it's probably the most demotivating thing you can do to a team, right?
Right.
How do I give my manager feedback?
Yeah.
I love that. I don't know that I've ever really heard that advice. I've heard that you have to own your one-on-one, and I guess if folks don't have these, the idea of a one-on-one is it's just you and your manager on a weekly, fortnightly, sometimes monthly cadence. But if I'm talking to my manager regularly, like, how do I tell them, like, hey, I want more of a structured meeting? Maybe it would be a good first step.
Yeah, I think that's important. I had a candidate that had a boss that does not do one-on-ones at all, and she just said, I need to put time on your calendar. I need 30 minutes, and this is what I need to go over, and just really drive that. I know some people aren't, I guess, as assertive as this individual was, but I think it was really valuable in just creating that space, because she had feedback to give, not just about the manager, but just about the team in general. And it has to be intentional. And if you're not somebody that wants to ask for it in person or verbally, you can write it down, and you can start with, hey, I'd like, weekly check-ins, or just whatever you like. And then you can set the agenda on what you want to talk about. And I would suggest the sooner the better. If there's something urgent, don't wait until the weekly check-in, share it immediately.
I love that advice. And it's interesting. So you had 7 folks and you did weekly meetings with them. What's your thoughts on weekly versus biweekly versus monthly? And I know it's dependent on your industry and your team and the experience and stuff, but do you have any general feedback on that? That to me feels like a lot, but I don't know anything about, what your situation was.
Yeah, I think it's just getting into the habit of, sometimes it could be 30 minutes reserved, but you use 15 minutes or 10 minutes. And if they're doing well, it could be a pretty short check-in and just highlight all the stuff that they're doing really well, and if they have any questions or just anything, updates on how the company is doing, just like providing updates. But what motivates certain people, and so you kind of talk about the incentives that are going on, the contests, the different things, and talking about the future, the vision, and where we're going. But I don't know, I think it's just like you're going to the gym. Okay, you can go to the gym once a month, once a week, but whatever it is, it'll become a routine, and then it will just become habit, and you create that space for it.
I love the gym analogy, because if you go to the gym once a month, you'll see improvement over a very, very long period of time, or maybe you won't. Maybe you'll slip, right? Because you just don't get in enough. If you go to the gym once a week, you're going to see improvements faster. You might want to do more gym. You might want to do less gym, right? And establishing that routine, I don't know. I just really, really love that analogy, because anybody who's worked out, if you don't work out regularly, that first time after a break, it's hard. It's hard to get back doing running or lifting or whatever you're doing, right? And you feel it, you're much more sore. But if you have a frequency or a habit of it, every once in a while, maybe it hurts a little bit more or whatever, but it's a way less pain than taking a month off or whatever.
Yes.
I'll just say, I think, frankly, that if you're a manager and you don't have one-on-ones that are scheduled with your employees, you need to fire yourself. Your job is to know what's going on, and the way that you do that is through the people who work.
Yes,
right? It's
absolutely.
like you're not in the work anymore. You're a manager. The gym thing. I got to work that into the title. I love it. One-on-ones with your managers, like going to the gym. So you've gone from like individual contributor, you've gone to running a team, and now you're running a team in a different industry. Can you talk a little bit about industry hopping?
Yeah.
And like, why did you want to get out of the recruiting space? Maybe give folks a little bit of insight into what your new role is and what you're doing now, and how it's different and the same.
Yeah, I did recruitment and staffing for 10 years, and I could say I easily worked with hundreds of different companies during that 10-year span. And I think I really liked the variety and the exposure, and just, I don't know, but people are people, essentially, wherever you go. It doesn't matter what industry it is. But I think just really aligning yourself with more of a focus was what I was looking for. And, I've always been a big fan of like organic and all natural, sustainability. And I feel like that really aligns with the values. And I think when people are looking for work, money, comp is usually what comes to mind first. And again, depends on where you are in your career, because that might be less important or more important depending on how financially stable you are, or your partner, or if you have support from your family. But I keep hearing more about values, kind of aligning with values now versus just like an industry or a job title, or so that's one big reason why. And I actually have been an Assan's customer for over a decade as well. And if you're already aligned with a brand, it's such an easy transition to like step into that role, because you understand the product, you're passionate about it, you believe in it. And just kind of going forward, seeing the future, there's a lot of awareness around like self-care and eco-conscious sustainability. I think millennials, but especially Gen Z, they care about how we're taking care of our planet. I mean, that is more the forefront of their minds than even retirement or some things. They're not even thinking about that. They're thinking about what we're doing right now and how we can make that change.
For folks who don't know, what's your new role and what company are you with?
So I'm the VP of Operations at Assan's Skincare. We're located in Southwest Portland, and we mainly focus on skincare lines. We have a new line that just came out, which is really popular right now. It's the multi-fruit peptide and collagen that's working its way into some of the local Portland markets as well.
Cool. Let's pretend that I don't use any skincare products. And could you just tell me what that was that you just said in English?
Well, essentially, we need to take care of our skin the same way we take care of our bodies, essentially. And that's kind of an afterthought. Like, okay, I have to, eat healthy and do all these things, but we're not protecting the thing that protects us is our skin. And what we have is mostly plant-based products. It's essentially plant-based that we use, and your skin absorbs like 60% of the stuff that you put on your skin. And so you want it to be natural, healthy. You don't want your skin to be absorbing pollutants or whatever, chemicals. We're exposed to so many chemicals in shampoo, in your shaving cream, like whatever you can think of, it probably has chemicals. I think just a big part of that skincare is like the, wellness, the entire, your health and wellness.
You hit on so much there. Skin's the largest organ in the body. Everyone thinks it's like the heart, the liver, the brain, and it's actually your skin. And that absorption factor, I don't think people really think about. Most people shower probably every day or every couple days. And I would challenge folks at home to, even if it's an organic product, go look at the back of the bottle and try to pronounce any of that shit. And the longer the word, go put that in Google and see what that means, right?
Right.
Like, if you have to explain the ingredients in your product in highly technical chemistry terms, I'm always skeptical of that.
Right.
And especially for like any kind of a lotion or like a makeup, and if you're something you're using daily, the cumulative effects of that over time are very unknown. And the more minimal the ingredients, I think, the better. But also organic compounds tend to be a little bit more friendlier to the body.
Yeah, I mean,
and they at least break down right when they get in. If your sunscreen is lasting for 12 hours, it's probably not going to be good for your health long term.
Yeah.
Reapply it.
No, for sure. We think about like foods that are good for the body. It's as close to nature as possible, right? It's as close to its original, whatever form it was. And skincare is the same thing, for our products, it's food grade, actually. That means you can technically eat it. And so if you can, 60% of what you're putting in your body, if you can't eat it, then you probably shouldn't put it on your skin.
That's so wonderful. And it's such a good rule of thumb. And not that you don't go eat the skincare products, folks. Like full disclosure, don't do it.
Don't do it.
But that's such a good rule of thumb. If it's not something that should be in your body, it's not something that should probably be on your body either. And a lot of the foods we eat shouldn't be in our body either, because they're super processed and have all sorts of chemicals that we don't understand and our bodies don't understand because we invented them recently, right? God, I didn't see. I mean, we've talked a little bit. I didn't even realize that. You just sold me.
Thank you.
I cannot underscore that enough. The organic greenwashing is very much a thing, and technically, any hydrocarbon is organic, right? So oil is technically organic. So your car is technically organic, chemically. However, you shouldn't drink oil, right? You shouldn't consume oil. You shouldn't consume the byproducts of oil because they're incredibly toxic.
We're breathing it in all the time.
Yeah. You're not going to go swim in an oil field. And if you do, you'll probably die. But having food grade ingredients in your skincare is amazing. Like you said, absorption of the skin is up to 60%. And that sunscreen that you get in the grocery store aisle probably works. But it's also going into your skin, and if you, again, can't pronounce it or, don't consume, is on there.
And it's going to the oceans as well, and the fish, and you eat the fish, and so,
Yeah, that's awesome. So people can find your stuff in Portland.
Yes, New Seasons, Market of Choice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite product?
Yes, I do. I have the Dragon Blood Serum. It's one that is used for part of your night routine. You use it after you wash your face, put the serum on, and it's like the first thing that gets absorbed after you wash your face. So it has like lots of nutrients, and I like to think it's like food for your skin before bed, and you just kind of put it on, and it does amazing things with your complexion, your glow, keeps the wrinkles kind of at bay for a while. So
sure. So let's pretend that I don't have a night routine.
Yeah.
How would I get started on that?
Yeah, we have a 5-step routine, which I think sounds intimidating for a lot of people for our new product line. But if you just don't have a night routine, just start with cleaning your face and moisturizing it. And that takes like less time than brushing your teeth. It's like probably 2 minutes or less. And that's a good place to start. But just getting all that grime off, you don't want to sleep in everything that you've been exposed to all day. So like getting it off and then locking it in with moisture.
Okay. Is there anything else that we want to share with us? So we've kind of talked a little bit through your career journey and hopefully got some tips for folks in the interviewing and hiring process. Talked a little bit about your transition and how having something that aligns with your values is, I think, just as important as what you put on your skin. Yeah. This is not a sponsored cast for folks.
No.
I love the metaphors in that, and I think, as you aptly pointed out, nobody really thinks through this very much. I don't, right? I know we pretended that I'm not into the skincare industry, and we pretended that I don't have a routine, but I got to be transparent that I don't have any of that, and I don't think about this at all.
Yeah.
And now you have me really thinking, so I'm going to reflect on this afterwards. Right. But I always like to ask people, is there anything else that you want to mention or talk about that we didn't hit on?
Yeah. So there's a new version of cover letters out there that I've heard that have been more effective. Ooh. Although I haven't tried it myself yet. I try to stay up to date with things that are trending or working. Because I have a lot of friends that are like job seekers, and I still stay in touch with a lot of people in general. But instead of the traditional cover letter, like kind of selling yourself. There's something called pain letters, if I read that correctly. I remember pain letters. Essentially, you are reaching out to the hiring manager to address their pain points and what you would do about those challenges and how your skill set would help solve those issues or whatever that may be. But yeah, that the new term is called pain letters, and it might be something worth looking into if you feel like your cover letters aren't very successful. And sometimes people ask, well, is that even required? Do people even read them? I've had hiring managers not want to look at the resume without cover letters, and that's really rare because we usually do a bunch of the vetting initially, but it's still an important piece. And even if it is one aspect of the consideration, you could stand out. Like you could have the letter that gets their attention.
That's awesome. And the cover letter, I think for folks who don't understand, is a resume gives your work experience and skills. A cover letter is a thing that a lot of people don't do that allows you to talk through your fit. In this case, the pain letter. That's an interesting thing I don't think I've heard of yet. But also anything else that you think relevant to the job or might be enticing advertising, I should say, maybe you as a candidate, right?
Yeah, bring some color to the resume, essentially.
And it's another one of those things where if you don't do the work, you're in the bottom of the pile.
Right.
And so if you're not doing those, I would suggest just doing a cover letter, period. But anytime you can, again, do the work a little bit more, go that little extra mile to say, hey, here's the problems I think you might have. Here's how I think I can help solve them.
Yeah.
is awesome advice. And that's just good if you're already hired or you're in a job. That kind of thing is how you get promoted.
Yeah.
Right. What can you help your manager with? How can you maybe volunteer for a project or something? And you get some experience, but then you also show your leadership potential, because I think a lot of leadership is recognizing opportunity and doing it.
Yes.
Making it happen. It's executing, right?
Right.
It's like having the idea of the thing. Sure, go do it. But like, if you don't do it, you're not a leader.
Yes.
The last question I like to ask folks is there anything you're reading or consuming that you find really interesting that you'd want to share with everyone?
Yeah, there was a book that stood out to me a little while. I read it at least a couple years ago. It's called Crucial Conversations. It's something that I realized I avoided. I mean, naturally, we avoid conversations that we need to have, especially if the stakes are high, right? You think of the worst case scenario that's going to happen, but most of the time, that's not how things play out. And I think that book really helps you build those skills to start when the stakes are small. You don't kind of wait to have that conversation when it's serious. When you're noticing a pattern or something, you just casually mention it right away, versus it being like someone's getting written up. But I think that book just lays good groundwork for communication, and 50% of your interview is communication. And it doesn't have to be a certain style. So I don't want people to think like, oh, they have to be like a public speaker to pass an interview. But they do need to communicate their thoughts concisely, clearly. And I think a lot of people don't do that very well in an interview. And I would say, if you're wondering why you didn't get an interview, at least 70% of the time, it's something to do with communication.
Sure. That's really good advice. And I think the Crucial Conversations book is something I read a long time ago. I had to get trained in it for something. And I agree that, especially if you're early in your career, it's crucial. Right? You make a lot of mistakes in your early career you can avoid by reading that. And it's one of those things, too, where if you've read it in the past or have you maybe gone through a class or something, pick it up again, because you have to have that constant reinforcement or that constant reminder. Just like your one-on-ones with people, right? This idea you do it once and then you're done is something I really want to dispel.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Well, thank you so much for being on the pod and sharing your experiences, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Andrew.
You can find us at 38.com. It's like the word create, but with a 3 instead of the C. As always, we encourage you to listen, watch, do. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/38 or at ko-fi.com/38.